Hello, second grade teachers. Today we're going to take a look at Unit 7, Measuring Time and Money. The purpose of this video is to provide an overview of the standards, intended pacing, and sample instructional strategies for Unit 7. In this portion of the video, we are going to review the AKS and Indicators of Achievement, or IOAs, for Unit 7. The AKS is the overarching knowledge and skills that students are expected to master. The IOAs are the learning objectives that allow students to demonstrate mastery of the AKS. The AKS and IOAs may not be taught in their entirety the first time they appear on the instructional calendar. Some AKS and IOAs will appear multiple times throughout the year. In Chapter 2 of the video, we will look to see how the AKS and IOAs in this unit are paced in detail. This unit has two AKS, AKS 6 and AKS 2. Under the AKS, you will find the Indicators of Achievement, or IOAs, that we are teaching at this time. Notice for AKS 6, we are focusing on IOAs 6A, 6B, and 6C. And for AKS 2, we are focusing on and revisiting AKS 2A and 2E. You will also see that we have provided you with the state coding at the end of the IOAs so that if you are looking up resources on the Georgia DOE website, you are able to find the IOA that is related to the GCPS IOA. IOAs without the state coding at the end are specific to Gwinnett. AKS 6 involves students telling and writing time from analog and digital clocks to the nearest 5 minutes using AM and PM. Students will also measure and estimate elapsed time using a timeline to the nearest hour and half hour on the hour or half hour. Students will also build understanding of money to solve problems, finding the value of coins and determining coin combinations, and problems involving dollar bills. In second grade, students should solve problems involving only dollars or only cents. Let's take a closer look at the IOAs that will allow students to demonstrate mastery of AKS 6. In IOA 6A, students will categorize daily activities by AM and PM, tell and write time from an analog and digital clock to the nearest 5 minutes. And new to this AKS IOA, students will estimate and determine elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. Problems involving elapsed time in second grade should be written so as to avoid crossing over AM and PM. In 6B, students will find the value of a group of mixed coins within 100 cents and identify the values of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. And finally, in 6C, students will solve 1- and 2-step mathematical problems that involve either only dollars or only cents. AKS 2 involves students continuing to add and subtract numbers using a variety of strategies based on place value, part whole, and properties of operations. Students will also continue to work on building fluency with addition and subtraction within 20. Let's take a closer look at the IOAs that will allow students to demonstrate mastery of the AKS 2. IOA 2A, students will continue to work on building fluency with addition and subtraction within 20 using a variety of mental part-whole strategies. This is an ongoing IOA. Reaching fluency is an ongoing process that will continue through number talks. Students should know all sums of two one-digit numbers by the end of second grade. And remember, this IOA will be continued throughout the unit using number talks. In IOA 2E, students will add and subtract numbers within 100 in the context of 1- and 2-step word problems, including a variety of problem types that have all unknowns in all positions, including result unknown, change unknown, and start unknown. They will also use drawings and objects and equations with a symbol for an unknown number to solve the 1- and 2-step problems. And finally, in this unit, you will also see that IOA clustered with IOA 6C to include problems that involve money. This portion of the video, we will look at the pacing guide to see how the AKS and IOAs have been paced over the course of the unit. Our pacing guide is closely aligned with state pacing. With this first year of new standards, we want to ensure we are following the expectations from the state. The pacing guide is an example intended to model how instruction of the AKS and IOAs in each unit may be facilitated, but teachers should design pacing to be responsive to the learning needs of their students. Now, at the top of the pacing guide, you will see the name of the unit, the big ideas for the unit, and the suggested pacing. This unit will focus on measuring time and money, and the suggested pacing is 5 weeks. The unit consists of telling and writing time from analog and digital clocks to the nearest 5 minutes using AM and PM, and estimating and measuring elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. Finding the value of coins and determining combinations of coins that equal a given amount that is less than 100 cents. Solving problems involving dollar bills or coins using the dollar and cent symbols appropriately. Adding and subtracting fluency within 20, and adding and subtracting within 100 to solve 1- and 2-step word problems using drawings and equations with a symbol for the unknown numbers to represent the problem. The pacing guide is set up with a list of AKS and IOAs or IOAs, which have been strategically clustered together. This is followed by our suggested pacing. Specifically, on the left column provides the learning progressions for the AKS IOAs, whether this be the concrete, representational, abstract progression, or the progression between specific learning targets within the IOAs. Now, this right column provides resources to guide instruction, such as GCPS traditional and task-based lessons, as well as Georgia DOE learning plans. Unit 7 begins with IOA 6A, tell and write time from an analog clock or digital clocks to the nearest 5 minutes using AM and PM. And the new part of the IOA includes estimating and measuring elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour for a suggested 8 days. The progression over the 8 days consists of students. For 4 days, students are telling and writing time to the nearest 5 minutes from digital and analog clocks. Through a Georgia DOA learning plan, students will build a number line and connect that process to a clock face. Students will use the created number line clock to tell and write time to the nearest 5 minutes. Students will progress to estimating time when a clock only has an hour hand. Finally, students will tell and write time from pictures and analog and digital clocks. 4 days, the remaining 4 days of the 8, students will be estimating and measuring elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. Learning targets and or lessons will focus on given the start time and the elapsed time, determine the end time. Given the start time and end time, determine the elapsed time, and given the elapsed time and the end time, determine the start time, and then a variety of other problems. It's down here where the elapsed time starts on our pacing guide. After students have learned to tell time to the nearest 5 minutes and estimate and measure elapsed time, we will move to IOA 6B for a suggested 5 days. So we'll scroll here to 6B. The progression over the 5 days consists of students using coin manipulatives to find the value of a group of coins for 3 days and progressing to determining combinations of coins that equal a given amount less than 100 cents. And finally, reasoning about the value and determining combinations of coins. After finding the value and determining combinations of coins, we will move to 6C and 2E to solve 1- and 2-step word problems involving dollar bills or coins using the dollar and cent symbols appropriately for a suggested 12 days. This was done to allow students to not only continue to work with 1- and 2-step word problems, but also to give students more experience with the various problem types and equations to represent the problem. Over the 12-day progression, you will see days where there are clusters of 6C, IOA 6C and 2E, and then you will see IOA 6C individually and 2E individually. So we'll scroll here and you can see 6C it's individually, and you'll see some days where it's clustered with 2E. The 12-day progression also includes using base 10 blocks and base 10 drawings to solve problems involving coins using the cent symbol appropriately, progressing to using paper bills to solve problems involving dollar bills. Problems will also include all problem types and writing equations to represent the problems. There will be a 2-day Georgia DOE task-based learning plan where students will have experiences finding combinations of coins to get to a given amount and then exploring different ways to spend $30 in an activity called a trip to the store. You can see as we scroll here, the learning plan is here. And then finally, scroll down, the students will also participate in a 3-act task where students determine what combinations of coins were placed in a bank when given the total of $1 or 100 cents. It's called It All Adds Up. Chapter 3 of the video will highlight specific instructional strategies that will be utilized in Unit 7. Please refer to the Analyzing the Standards, or ATS, for guidance on additional instructional strategies for each IOA. To begin, we will look at AKS IOAs solve real-life problems involving time and money. And specifically, we will look at IOA 6A, tell and write time from analog and digital clocks to the nearest 5 minutes using AM and PM, and estimate and measure elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. In first grade, students learn to tell and write time in hours and half hours using analog and digital clocks. Students also learn to measure elapsed time to the hour on the hour using a predetermined number line. Well, as you can see, in second grade, students will extend that learning to include telling and writing time to the nearest 5 minutes. They will use AM and PM, and they will also estimate and measure elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. Students will also learn that AM starts just after midnight and lasts until just before noon, and that PM starts just after 12 noon and ends just before 12 midnight. Now, the manipulative students will use to support this learning will be the Judy clock and the number line clock. Let's take a look at both of these manipulatives and the first part of IOA 6A, telling and writing time. Here you can see both clock manipulatives. The Judy clock is what you have traditionally seen in your math kits and you've used with your students. Now we have a new clock manipulative called the number line clock. Let's take a closer look at the number line clock. As you can see, the number line clock can be taken apart. You can take the hands off. And then we have the minutes we can take off, and we have the hours that we can take off. We're going to start here with the hours. As you can see, the hours on the clock can be opened up, and if we flip it over, we can see the numbers nicely aligned, and it looks a lot like a number line, which students are used to using at this point. So we need to form a connection between the number line and the clock and how they work together. Students will see that the clock is just a round number line. We'll also use this number line when we're determining elapsed time. But the biggest connection is just allowing students to see that this clock is just a round number line. and that's our hours. We also have a section of the clock that shows the minutes. This section is very important as well. It opens up and we can see a nice little line of minutes here, and it's in increments of 5. As you can see, it's color-coded. This helps students to recognize groups of 5 minutes so they can become fluent with counting by fives and later fluent with multiples of 5. This is going to support your students with telling and writing time to the nearest 5 minutes. Also, as we can see, it also supports showing from the 12 to the 1 that there's a passage of time of 5 minutes. They can see the increments of minutes here. And that's why when the minute hand is on the 1, we say 5, like 12:05, 1:05. And the same with 2, we see that the 10 minutes are there, and they can see those increments in between. Also with the minutes, students can see that there are 60 minutes in an hour, and then about halfway around is about 30 minutes. We can also have students work with a one-handed clock. Like you'll see a lesson with a one-handed clock where students are estimating time. We know that when the hour hand is exactly on the number, we know that that's 8 o'clock. When it's halfway between 2 of our hours, 8 and 9, and we talked about how there's 60 minutes in an hour and halfway is 30, then we know halfway between those two numbers is approximately 8:30. And then we can push it a little further when it's not quite on the 9, but it's very close to the 9. Students can begin to estimate that it's probably about 8:45 or 8:50 or 8:55. And this is going to be big understanding for our students because they normally have the misconception here, and they'll say 9 o'clock or 9:55 because they have that misconception of thinking it's the 9th hour, but the hour hand isn't quite on the 9, so it's still the 8th hour, so it's still 8, around 8:45 or 8:50, 8:55 if they're estimating the time. Students can do this same estimation if they had only the minute hand. We can see that the minute hand is on the 12. We know that this is o'clock. So students can estimate this could be 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, as well as if the minute hand is on the 6, they know that it's halfway or 30 minutes. It could be 1:30, 2:30, 3:30. So that same type of estimation work can also be done with the minute hand. And you notice that I mentioned that we would be using 2 manipulatives to support this work. And that's because our number line clock does have some limitation, and that is it doesn't mimic how the hands of a real clock move as time passes, like the Judy clock. As you can see, if I move the hands of the Judy clock, the hour hand is replicating how an actual clock would look as the time passes. Whereas with the number line clock, let's say if we have it at 1:30, the number line clock, if we want to make 1:30, students will go to that halfway mark and they could simply put it on the 1, which is a misconception because we know that in real passage of time, that hour hand really is between the 1 and the 2 because it's halfway around. So students will have to make sure that they make that adjustment as they use this clock. So it's really good to keep your Judy clocks because it does replicate that passage of time like a real clock would have. Now I want to highlight the new component of this IOA, estimating and measuring elapsed time using a timeline to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour. Keep in mind, as I just stated, the times are to the hour or half hour on the hour or half hour, and these times will never cross from AM to PM. So students won't be counting elapsed time 11, 12, and then 1. The times will either all be in the AM or they'll all be in the PM. So now let's take a look at a problem I have here. It says, Lisa attended a morning Zoom meeting that started at the time shown on the clock. The meeting ended 3 hours later. What time did Lisa's Zoom meeting end? Be sure to label the end time with either AM or PM to describe the time of day the event occurred. So I can see in this problem, making sense of what's happening, Lisa's attending a Zoom meeting, and the time of her meeting, I am going to have to look at the clock to determine the time her meeting started. It says the meeting ended 3 hours later. That's telling me that the meeting lasted 3 hours. And I need to find out what time Lisa's Zoom meeting ended, and I need to be sure to label that time with AM or PM to describe the time of day of the event. So looking at the clock here, if I were to just look at the minute hand, the hour hand, and just estimate, I can see that the hour hand is between the 8 and the 9. So it's not quite on the 9, so it's still the 8th hour. So in looking at that hour hand and seeing that it's halfway between, I know that the minute hand, when it goes halfway around, normally it's about 8:30. But I want to confirm that. So that was just estimating. I want to confirm that it is actually 8:30. So when I look at my minute hand now, I can see, as I stated here, we're still in the 8th hour because the hour hand has not made it to the 9th hour yet. And when I count by fives to where my minute hand is located, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, I can see, in fact, that it is 8:30. And I know from Lisa's problem, just thinking about it, it says her Zoom meeting was in the morning. She's probably at work. So this more than likely is happening in the AM. So it's 8:30 AM. Now that I know what time Lisa's meeting started, 8:30 AM, I need to determine what time the meeting ended by measuring and finding out the elapsed time to find out the actual end time of Lisa's meeting. As we have learned before, the clock and the numbers on the clock are exactly like a round number line. So we're going to use that information to help us calculate the elapsed time or find the end time in our problem today. As you can see, I've taken the hours off of my number line clock, and I'm going to show that it's just the same as a round number line. When I flip it over, I can see the numbers that look a lot like the number line that we've studied this year. And I can also see that on paper, I can create my own number line, just like the clock has here. And I can show how to find the elapsed time for my problem today. And as you can see, it matches my number line perfectly. The only thing that I've done on the number line is I've shown the actual times on my number line, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, to have a timeline here. So I'm going to use this number line to help me solve this elapsed time problem to determine the end time. Again, I want to show the start time on my number line. I know that the start time is 8:30, and I have my number line here, or my timeline here, to help me to show where 8:30 is on our timeline. So let me see, can I pull it in a little bit closer for you so you can see? I know I have 8 o'clock here, but our time that the meeting started is 8:30, which is about halfway around. For the minute hand, before it goes a full hour, it goes about halfway around. So I know that my 8:30 is about halfway between 8 and 9 o'clock. So I'm going to place my dot here. And this is 8:30. I know that the meeting lasted for 3 hours. So I'm going to use my Judy clock here, and I'm going to show the passage of time for an hour. The minute hand goes all the way around one complete time and stop where it started. I can see now that the time is 9:30. So on my timeline, I want to show 1 hour passing. I'm going to jump 1 hour halfway between 9 and 10 because I know it's 9:30 that I'm trying to show. So right here, 1 hour later is 9:30. So I want to go another hour on my clock. The minute hand goes around a complete turn, stop where it started. I can see now that that's 10:30. So on my timeline, I want to do the same. I want to jump another hour. I know that 10:30 is between 10 and 11. So that's where my jump will end, right between the 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock at 10:30. And now that's 2 hours. I have 1 more hour that the meeting lasted. So I will start here and I will turn a complete hour around the clock, stopping where I started. And I can see that the time now is 11:30. So I will make that jump between 11 and 12, about halfway, to show 11:30. So there's my 3 hours. So I can see that Lisa's meeting ended at 11:30. And I know that this is 11:30 a.m. because remember, we determined that earlier that this is happening in the morning for her meeting. So it's 11:30 a.m. I have answered all parts of my problem. I had to determine the time that Lisa's Zoom meeting ended. We know that it ended at 11:30. And I also had to use either AM or PM to describe the time of day that it was, and we determined that that time of day was AM. So teachers, just know that this particular problem is an elapsed time problem where the end time is unknown, but we could also have problems where we are given the start time, 8:30, and then given the end time, 11:30, and then students can use the timeline to jump to define the elapsed time. Students could also be given the end time and say that the meeting started 3 hours earlier, and then we would have to determine the start time. So again, they could be given that end time and say that the meeting lasted 3 hours, giving you the elapsed time, and students would jump back to determine the start time. Now, as students move from the concrete to the representational, students will now begin to just use the timeline or number line to help them solve elapsed time problems. And those problems can be elapsed time where the end time is unknown, the start time is unknown, or the elapsed time is unknown. So, which strategy? In mathematics, the emphasis is on the reasoning and thinking about the quantities within mathematical contexts. Specific mathematics strategies for teaching and learning are not mandated by the Georgia Department of Education or assessed on state or federally mandated tests. Students may solve problems in different ways and have the flexibility to choose a mathematical strategy that allows them to make sense of and strategically solve problems using efficient methods that are most comfortable for and make sense to them. It is critical that teachers and parents remain partners to help each child grow to become a mathematically literate citizen. These standards preserve and affirm local control and flexibility. From the Georgia DOE's Comprehensive Grade Level Overview. To ensure completion credit in PD&E, please be sure to complete the following Google form. Please scan the QR code in order to get the Google form. Thanks for watching.